And we're live. Travis Burns, pleasure to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for sitting down with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
I've only heard good things about you from Joe.
Well, it's probably all lies.
Well, shoot, man, it seems like almost all the farriers you meet in like the Eastern United States, if I tell them I'm from Blacksburg, they're like, "Do you know Travis Burns?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Oh man, Travis, yada yada yada." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I just feel like I've known him forever."
Yeah.
But I didn't know you were as highfalutin of a deal in the farrier world as you are until I started traveling other places and people knew about
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no, it's like, when you're at home, you're just another farrier down the road.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I don't think I'm anything special by any means, but I have been fortunate to meet a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the world and the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what, just to like start things off, what is your official title at Virginia Tech now?
So my official title at Virginia Tech, so I'm an associate professor here in the Chief of Farrier Services in the Department of Large Animal Clinical Sciences.
Okay. And so as far as like your responsibilities and day to day, what does that kind of entail?
So day to day is a little different. I mean, primarily I still shoe horses, trim and shoe horses is the primary objective, but through the majority of the students' curricular year or their fourth year, they can elect to spend 3 weeks at a time in the farrier shop. So it's kind of what we call experiential learning or teaching. So instruction just in a clinical based setting. And then through the fall semester, I actually teach a lot in the didactic courses. And so a lot of lectures and labs and things like that to primarily third year vet students, but also now since the retirement of Dr. Pleasant, I teach a lot in the second and the first years as well. So it's kind of all over the place. And then we do a little bit of research as well, but still primarily my primary job is to trim and shoe horses.
Gotcha. So this time of year, like in the summer, are you pretty much just doing the horse stuff, or are you like part of any studies right now?
Well, it's kind of funny. So a lot of the grants just get awarded and you get funding at July 1.
Okay.
And so we're in the midst of just starting another project. We just completed another project and just got it published. But we're just got funded for another one on gait analysis. But we didn't even have the funds until July 1. So we're still ordering the software and the hardware to be able to do that project. And during the summer, I just primarily doing the horse thing. But obviously, as you know, being in a college town, it's a little different than the majority of farriers. So here, a decent chunk of my clientele leave. I shoe for a lot of students and things like that. And so they'll leave for the summer. And as you know, the riding program, they slow down. There's a lot of horses that aren't there this time of year. So it's a little slower during the summer, which is kind of nice. And certainly no lecture or lab or anything like that.
Sure. Go ahead and scooch that mic like an inch and a half closer. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah, let's take this thing back a little bit to how did you get into this? What made you interested in becoming a farrier?
So I got into being a farrier when I was a little kid. So I was a little hyper, a little crazy as a kid. Like I was kind of quiet, like stayed with myself, but I was constantly doing something. And so my dad and two uncles were both part-time farriers, and my uncle ran a trail guide service down in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in North Carolina. And so they would trim and shoe all 50 of those horses. And they would try very hard to keep me away while they were doing that. And now, certainly being a farrier and being around kids and dogs and other things while you're shoeing horses, I see why they wanted to keep me away. But naturally, to an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, I wanted to be a part of that. Like there was, hot shoes, banging, grinding, you're nailing into a horse's foot. Like I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So that's kind of the thing that piqued my interest for sure. And then I'm kind of a self-determined person, so I just kind of went at it. And then when they found me and saw what I was doing, I'd already rationalized all these things in my mind as to what they were doing and why, and just went to it. And then when my uncle found me for the first time shoeing a little pony in the barn, they all decided as a group that it's probably best if they get a hold of me and give me some structure and kind of teach me and help me. So they let me start pulling shoes off, cleaning them up, getting them ready to nail back on, handing tools, things like that. And then it just steadily grew from there.
So what age were you when they felt like you said, they needed to start kind of channeling you?
Oh, I was probably just 10 or 11. By 14, I was shoeing them all.
Wow.
Yep.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people grow up like that.
No. And again, and I just kind of grew up in one of those families, like as soon as you're big enough, it's time. You've got some jobs, you got some chores. It's time to go.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I was just doing the math on that. You said 2 part-time farriers and 50 horses to keep shod. That's a lot of work.
But no, it was a lot of work. And I did that group of horses from the time I was probably 14 till really 23 when I moved to Northern Virginia, or 22 when I moved to Northern Virginia.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it's a fair amount of work, but it's just seasonal work. So they just really run from April to November. The park shuts down November 1. So nobody,
okay.
Well, really, we were just 5 miles north into the park, but all the concessions are shut down. And then the road actually gets shut down right there as well.
Okay.
November 1. So
gotcha.
Just part of the year. But.
So they could pretty much let them be barefoot for the winter or whatever you have.
Oh, yeah. No, we just turn them out. If they had shoes on, they did.
We're going to lose them.
No, it was a little rough. So it's a lot different than what I do now. But I think that's probably why I'm not very judgmental as a farrier. I've done some stuff you're maybe not so proud of, but
not necessarily textbook.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you got to be realistic about it as well. And when you're trying to make a living with horses, that profit margin can be a little slim sometimes.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Got to think about what you're doing.
Ben and I agree.
Yeah, for sure.
You see a lot of that out west on big ranches where guys are expected to shoe the horses they ride, and they tack them on there. Probably helps to have some carpentry skills more than anything else. For some of those guys, they just get it done.
For sure.
And then you'll have a guy in there who's kind of a navel gazer who takes 4 hours, and his shoeing gets handed off to somebody who just gets it on there in about 30 minutes, even if it's not as pretty.
Well, unfortunately with horses, there is always a time limit. They're only going to put up with it for so long. So you better get on with it.
Do your folks still run that place?
Actually, so it was always my uncle that ran it, and unfortunately he's passed away. But my aunt, his sister, she owns it now, and her son and her grandson, they still run it to this day. And so both of them, they'll shoe horses there. And then my little cousin, it's really awesome right now. He had a friend going through high school. It's kind of cool to see him kind of take the same track as me. He started shoeing those horses, then went off to a farrier school, then went off to a group practice out in Colorado. And now he's working in Wellington, Florida. And it was kind of cool 2 years ago. Well, no, actually just last year I got to judge a farrier contest out in Colorado, and he was there competing. And so it's pretty awesome to kind of see somebody not taking my exact path, but pretty close, and from that same little hometown. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So
yeah. What's the name of the town?
The town my mother lived in was Waynesville, North Carolina.
Okay.
But my dad and that side of the family, they all live in Bryson City, North Carolina.
Gotcha. We've got a friend that's from Cashiers.
Oh yeah. So Cashiers is in between Waynesville and Bryson.
Mm-hmm. That's, who I'm talking about, right, Ben? Yeah. But you, I was going to say, you must have spent enough time in Northern Virginia and Blacksburg. You don't sound like most people from that part of the world anymore.
You let me get two or three of these drinks in me, you'll get a whole different accent.
We'll get another hour and a half into the podcast.
You throw a microphone in front of me, and sometimes the university trained person comes out.
Yeah. Well, you go ahead and dump that crap.
Give us the real Travis Burns.
Yeah.
You were mentioning Round Hill. So is that the first place you went when you went out on your own to become a farrier and learn from people? Is that where you went?
And Round Hill?
Yeah. To the internship there?
Oh, no. So Round Hill, that's what took me to Northern Virginia. There was a guy up there named Paul Goodness I went to work for. But no, I left home at 18. So where I grew up, there's not a lot of avenues to take. And so I needed to leave, and my mom was adamant that I was going to college regardless. And so I was lucky enough to go on a scholarship to the University of Tennessee, which is probably just an hour outside of my hometown. And I did my first year there, and then I transferred to North Carolina State University. And in between there, I did go to a proper farrier school in that gap. And there in Raleigh is where I started to trim and shoe horses on my own outside of my hometown. I mean, let's be honest, my hometown, I would shoe for my family and then friends of the family. And it was just so small. It's just a different world. So Raleigh was the first time I was ever out on my own, really going at it. And that's probably where I was exposed to a lot more than just, cold shoeing and just the sheer basics. So there was a guy just south of Raleigh named Andy Henderson that really helped me get started. But anyway, I was lucky enough there. I got to work for 3 or 4 guys, kind of start to build my own thing. I didn't grow up with much money. And so through college, my mom helped me some, but primarily I paid all my expenses trimming and shoeing horses, either after school or on the weekends, or as I moved on through school, I would just not take classes on Tuesday and Thursday and I would shoe horses. But that's really where I got started. And then I started working for NC State's vet school not in a fair position to start with. I was actually working in radiology, trying to get hours to apply to vet school. I thought maybe that was the path I wanted to go down, but quickly realized that was not what I wanted to do. But anyway, while I was working there, obviously they knew I was a farrier and I would shoe for some of the vets and the techs there. And so I started shoeing some of the horses in the college when there was a vet and a farrier that would come in for a day a week there. But when they weren't there, I would do some stuff for them. And that's really how I got started and kind of interested in the whole therapeutic aspect. And then that's kind of what spurred me to move on to Northern Virginia, to other things and other opportunities.
So because obviously you kind of had a passion about that, and it was kind of your direction. What made you make the decision saying, I'd rather pursue this as opposed to being a vet?
Yeah. So I'm, if you've been around many vets or vet students, you quickly realize that they, I don't know how to say it without making me sound like a horrible person, but they have this like overwhelming compassion for the animal, and like this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but this innate affection towards them. And to me, it's not that I don't have that. Like I certainly look at dogs and cats as like pets and something fun and to be around. But to me, horses were always work. They were never a hobby. They were never like a pet. Like they were, from the time I was little, like literally a horse has to be able to go out on the trail and make us $20 an hour, or it's got to go. It was never this pet or companion animal type thing. Is more like livestock, more probably closer to similar to people that grow up on a ranch. And so I quickly realized that I didn't have that in me, this overwhelming need to care for the animal beyond just, doing the job. And then also I quickly realized that the only part that really interested me was very specifically the hoof and the horse and lameness and things that I could actually fix and have a tangible thing to hold on to. Like, so the idea of giving something a peel and making it better didn't really interest me. I guess it's probably more of that mechanical engineering kind of thing. Like I mechanically could do something physical with my hands to help this more so than maybe at that time. And some of it was just pure ignorance. I just didn't understand with the brain and all the other aspects, things that you could do with them. So it's I don't know. It's hard to put totally into words, but I just quickly realized I was a lot different than they were. And it just wasn't for me. I just wanted to do that one thing.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
No.
But I am always curious because, like I said, I grew up here and I feel like I see a lot of people that, and you'd probably agree, there's way more people that come to a university, whether it be NC State or Virginia Tech or whatever, and they're like, I'm going to be a vet.
Oh yeah.
And there's probably way more people that end up finding some other track than actually becoming a vet. just because for one reason or another, whether it's, like you said, a perspective deal or something like that.
No, I think a lot do come and get into that. And, I don't know if maybe you or Kaylee one would have been in that course, but I used to go lecture in this course called Intro to Equine Industry. And I'd be like the second person to go in and lecture in it. And I'd ask everybody, all right, so how many people in here want to be a vet? And everybody raised their hand. Yeah. Like, all right, well, 2 of you are going to be. What are the other 80 of you going to do? And they don't know.
Yeah.
And I'll admit I was in that kind of boat. I didn't get a lot of encouragement that you could make it as a farrier or I'll admit I didn't realize all the things you could do in the equine industry.
Yeah, the options are pretty open for different things that you can do. I wanted to be a vet when I was like 18.
Sure.
And I think my compulsion for it was that I wanted to work around big animals and find something lucrative so I could be a cowboy somehow. I didn't realize there was ways you could actually come out here and ride horses for people or raise horses or sell horses, or, some people find other ways to make a living, still ride horses. But I saw that. I thought, hey, be a vet. And I had applied to a little internship near where my folks lived, and then I never did it. And then I went to Montana, and then next thing you know, I thought, nah, I'm glad I wasn't a vet. After the vet came out and preg checked 500 heifers one afternoon, I was like, yeah, I'm glad I'm not a large animal ranch vet.
Sure. No, it's definitely not an easy life. But
yeah, I went through that spell too, where I wanted to be a vet when I was a senior in high school. And who talked me out of it was actually Mark Chrisman of all people.
Yeah.
Which I bet you can believe that.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
Mark, he should be a guest on this thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
So he's on the short list.
Yeah.
I think I told you, like he travels all over Hell and Creation now. Yeah. So he's booked out for a couple of weeks, but yeah, we'd love to get him on this deal.
I want to come back just for that, just to see it.
Yeah.
He's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I was telling him, I was like, well, I'm going to Virginia Tech. And I think it was like the winter, and I still hadn't had to say like what my major was going to be. And I was like, yeah, man, I think I'm going to do animal science, and because I think I want to be a vet. And Mark looked at me and said, no, you don't.
No, I can believe it for sure.
And Mark, however long he's been a vet for like ever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, well, the only places there's money are swine and poultry. So just think about that.
Yeah.
But he had quite a bit of like, don't become a vet rhetoric for me. But no, I have a super, I'm sure just like you, like people who are really good at being a vet, like it's a hell of a thing. You have a lot of respect for them.
No, I do for sure.
But it definitely takes like a very unique individual.
No, it really does. And I mean, like the hours and the dedication they put in is something to be admired. But I think everybody's probably, if you grew up with animals at all, at some point you thought about, maybe I want to be a vet. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that thought crosses everybody's mind, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to our farrier the other day here about the shortage of large animal vets.
Oh, it's a real problem.
What do you think's driving that the most?
Oh, I think it just comes down to economics. And I'm not into this whole new age thing, but without a doubt, the work-life balance. Like there's no doubt. I mean, the large animal vets that are out there, and they tend to be in 1 or 2 or 3 person practices, and so they're on call, either every night, 24/7, or they're on every other night, or every third night, every third weekend. Like it's just brutal. And the going farm to farm, you never know what you're going to get into. Like if you're an on-call vet at a hospital, you've got power, lights, water, safe place, heat, air conditioning. When you're out going farm to farm in the middle of the night, who knows what you're going to encounter, people wise, animal wise, weather wise. And then the money, like we already alluded to in the horse industry, there's the profit margin in the equine industry is not huge in a lot of different places. And so, they can't afford these astronomical, bills to probably pay them appropriately for the amount of time they do spend. And so certainly the small animal life, where now they've embraced emergency only clinics. So a lot of small animal clinics, they know they're just going to work Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5. It's very routine. Well, I shouldn't say routine in the work they're doing, but it's very divided up. They know they can go pick their kid up at daycare. They know they can make the Little League baseball game. They know they have the weekend. They know they can plan the Disney World trip. They know they can do all those things. And in the large animal world, whether it's the food animal world or the production medicine management world or the equine world, you don't get that luxury. There aren't a big emergency clinics where you can send people. And so even if you're running your own practice and you say, okay, well, I'm not going to do emergency anymore. Even when you get that phone call from Joe and he's like, well, I got this horse over here, he's colicking, I'm not sure what to do. And you're lucky enough to be in Blacksburg. But what if you're 2 hours away from the next big referral hospital? That vet is, I've seen it and live with those people and been around those people enough. Like, they can say the words, no, I can't come see your horse because I got to do X, Y, or Z, or, oh, I'm just not on call, or I just physically can't. But the toll, once they hang up the phone with the client, the emotional toll that it takes on that person thinking about that horse and the fact that they can't go help it. Like I talked about, like, I don't have that innate compassion or that drive that a true vet has. And those people, it takes a toll on them emotionally and mentally not to be able to come help your horse. Like, even though you might get mad at them that they can't come, it kills them inside. And I've watched that with countless people that I work with, and it's horrible. And so until something changes, either you're able to pay more money, whether it's the profit in the livestock world or the equine world or whatever, you're able to pay more money to where you can open emergency only clinics, or the vet practices can employ more vets to where everybody can have time off and time away and time to do other things besides just be a vet. It's just going to continue to kill them, and they move on. And so a lot of the students that graduate from equine tracking or going into equine practice at the 5-year mark, less than 20% of them are still in the equine industry. They go small animal, or they go like Chrisman. How long was he in the equine world? And now he's in the pharmacy world. Like they move on to other things so they can have a better life.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Do vets take a Hippocratic oath or something like that?
There is a vet's oath, and I'll admit I apologize. I can't recite it. It's hanging on a big thing in our receiving area. But they take an oath, and I mean, and even outside of that, like I talked about, that innate like compassion and just the care for them. That's deeply ingrained in the people that actually become vets and are successful vets. And it does kill them to not be able to help in all instances. It's one of the reasons why they have such a high suicide rate in their profession.
I had no idea.
Yeah,
astronomical. It's horrible.
When, like I said, Mark was doing his deal, talking me out of being a vet. He didn't mention the suicide, but I think it's like at least large animal, if not just vet in general, it's like top 5 divorce rates of all professions in the United States.
It is,
because like you're saying, it's labor intensive. You kind of like ante up and say, this is what I'm going to do with my adult life. Yeah.
No, it consumes you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got sidetracked. So so did you, you said you were at NC State. So did you get your degree and then go from there? Or like, did you have a degree?
I do. Yeah. So actually my undergraduate degree is in animal science from NC State. And then my master's degree is ironically enough in education of all things.
And did you get that right after? Or?
No, actually I got that once I came here, because I got this job because I could kind of shoe a horse. And then they ask you to start teaching, start educating other people, but they don't ever sit you down and teach you how to do that. And so me being me, I just can't handle that. Like, somebody's got to help me. Like, you got to provide some structure. Like, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it to the best of my my ability. So I actually took the time to go through a graduate program in education just to learn how to be a better teacher, to try to.
Oh, so you did that like on your own volition. They didn't make you do
Oh,
that.
no.
That's
They didn't make me do it at all. Yep. They were very supportive. And so I won't lie, like the university made a deal with the Royal Veterinary College and they paid for me to do it. So they were very supportive of it, but it was never forced. Like I'll admit, being here, the department and the leadership that I've worked for have been extremely supportive of me and continuing education and professional development. I mean,
yeah. I mean, continuing education is so vital.
You just have to.
Yeah. So I do want to back up just one more thing, because this is just something I don't know. Maybe I can't imagine, just because I don't understand. Like you went ahead and you had your degree, and then so you were working for a guy up in Northern Virginia, you said?
Yeah, I worked in a group farrier practice up there.
Okay. And so when this opportunity came at Virginia Tech, what are they looking for, and like what attracted you to that as opposed to what you were doing up there?
Oh, well, what I was doing up there was training for this. So my time at NC State, I quickly realized I like the academic world. I like being in a vet hospital. I like seeing the anomaly cases. That's certainly something that interests me. And the more you get to know me, the more I'm extremely focused in what I do. Now, anything outside of there is pretty minimal, but what I do 100%. And when you get into a vet school world, every person, whatever their interest is, they are on it. Every bit of it, like their whole life is dedicated to it. Their research, like everything, they're fully invested. And so you've got all this, and I don't mean this in any offensive way, but you've got a whole bunch of nerdy people that are super interested in what they're interested in. And so I quickly realized, like, I fit in that world, that I'm not the weirdo anymore. I am the weirdo in the farrier profession. So I realized that was probably home for me, and I wanted to learn more. And so at NC State, I realized I wasn't ready to be there. I needed more help, more training. And so that's what took me to Northern Virginia. Was that there was a surgeon at NC State who knew a farrier up in Northern Virginia. So I met with him and I was like, hey, this is what I want to do. I don't want to go to vet school anymore. I really want to go into this, as far as I can and be the best I can. Where could I go for more training? What CE opportunities are out there? What professional development opportunities are out there? What could I do? And he's like, well, if you really want to do it, I know a guy up in Northern Virginia, and that's all he does is just therapeutic work. And I know that he trains people. So why don't you give him a call? So he gives me this guy's number. I call him. Ironically enough, he just started a formalized training program. So I got to be the first intern. I talked to him on a Thursday, and he's like, can you be here on Saturday to interview? Go up there, meet with him. And it was just a great fit for me. He was a great person for me, a great mentor, but they ran a group practice. And so he did primarily all just therapeutic or referral type work, kind of what I do now. And then, but he had a bunch of other farriers that did all different levels of horses, everything from your just backyard horses, like pet type horses, to, Olympic level competition and dressage, show jumping, and eventing. And so in this program, you got to spend time with him, but also time with all the other people. So you got a really nice, well-rounded thing. And then ironically enough, he worked at the Marion DuPont Scott Equine Medical Center up in Leesburg, which is a satellite hospital to here. And so that's the link to here, was I was there and working for him and just had that personality. And so it just kind of worked out well. I'd never been to Blacksburg, never had any thought. The only thing I knew of Virginia Tech was my horse judging coach at NC State. She went to undergrad here, and I knew that, and Michael Vick. That's really all I knew about Virginia Tech before I came.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty much what any outsider knows about Virginia Tech is Michael Vick. And then, maybe an alumni or two.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so I have one more question to add on to that, for you going there. Could you talk about, because I probably couldn't give a good definition of this. What would classify like therapeutic shoeing as opposed to, your regular farrier that someone might have with their horse?
Yeah. Well, obviously there's a lot of disease pathologies that affect both the hoof capsule, the internal or sensitive structures within the hoof, and ultimately the distal limb. And so there's lots of farriers out there that, just luckily most horses are fairly healthy and don't really have a lot of problems with their hoof capsule or their distal limb, but there is a certain percentage that have things like white line disease, kertomas, quarter cracks, laminitis, navicular disease, all of those things, distal phalanx fractures. And unfortunately, a lot of farriers just aren't either one of two things happen. Either they're not experienced and comfortable enough to handle those when they pop up, or they realize they lose money on those cases. Because whether you like it or not, like a farrier can go out and trim, in an hour. If you just have a herd of barefoot horses, a good farrier can trim 8 to 10 of them in an hour at $50 a pop. So that's a decent chunk of change. But when you get into these things like keratomas or distal phalanx fractures or white line disease, that one horse may take you 3 or 4 hours, and you unfortunately can never charge that same rate. You can't charge $500 an hour to do this kind of work. So a lot of farriers just elect not to do that kind of work. They'll just either want to refer it to another farrier or just flat out refuse to do it. But to me, the problem solving, the things and working as a team and doing lots of different things always interested me more than just going out and trimming 50 brood mares in a day. So that's how I would define. But
would you expound a little bit on keratomas? I've looked up some because I don't have experience with that.
Yeah,
and I've seen some gruesome images.
Mm-hmm.
What's the recovery rate on something like that? I mean, is that horse, some of those ones you see where they've notched the whole front of the hoof out and done some extensive work, are they going to get back to work eventually? Does that hoof all grow back together?
Yeah, yes, it does. So a keratoma is just like kind of a benign tumor of the keratin producing cells of the hoof wall. And in reality, they're fully epidermal in nature, or at least we think they're fully epidermal in nature. And so the treatment for them is typical surgical resection, whether it be a full hoof wall resection, meaning all the way from the ground bearing surface all the way to the cornet, or a window style resection, meaning that they just kind of try to debulk the keratoma and leave a strut at the top or proximal border closer to the cornet, and leave a portion intact at the distal margin, kind of more towards the ground bearing surface. Either way, they get removed, and luckily when you pull away the hoof wall, the tumor tends to go with it, and you're just left with hopefully pristine dermis. Like if you were truly to get into the semantics of it, there are probably still parent tumor keratoma cells there, and they often do reoccur. But anyway, depending on the area of the hoof, the hoof itself can take, in the heel region, probably like 6 months to grow from cornet to the ground. At the toe, we know it takes approximately a year to go from cornet to the ground, to be fully replaced by new growth. And so when you do those big hoof wall resections, the only way they heal is truly, they do epithelialize and go across that margin and do epithelialize and kind of become refractory to the outside world. But the only way they really heal is true replacement by growth from the cornet to the ground. And so depending on where the resection occurs, it can take 6 months to a year to have full growth. And yes, it does grow back. Fairly normal, fairly healthy tissue. That being said, like I said, it does epithelialize and keratinize and ultimately cornify, and you're able to cover it or rebuild the hoof or do whatever you're going to do. So most of those horses, even if it is a full hoof wall resection at the toe, let's say it's worst case scenario, oftentimes at the 3, 4, 5 month mark, we go ahead and rebuild them and return the horse to work. So it's not that they're fully out of work for a year, but you do have to do some specialized shoeing to make the hoof capsule protected and stabilized enough to return to work. But that first one can be pretty gruesome because, as you described, they remove full portions of the hoof wall all the way down to dermis.
Yeah, I was purposely looking up the most gruesome stuff I could find.
Of course,
I was
those are the
getting into
coolest
it.
pictures. Honestly,
yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I went this therapeutic route was at the University of Tennessee. I saw a farrier at that time. This is in probably 2001. And they, at that time, one of the primary treatments for laminitis was full dorsal hoof wall resections. So from toe quarter to toe quarter, they literally stripped off the entire outer hoof wall for that horse for laminitis. And to 18-year-old me, that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Like, wow, I really thought that was
So
awesome.
So I have a question for you because I felt like I tracked all that, but when you say they're removing part of the hoof wall, and when you pull that, the tumor comes with it. This isn't like a visible thing, is it?
Oh no,
Like,
it is a visible tumor.
Okay, so
Yeah, you got to look up some pictures of this, Joe.
yeah,
It's
so
pretty visible.
From what you just said, like, all right, you said your wife's from Maryland, right?
Mhm.
So you ever like gone and eaten crabs?
Yeah.
Or whatever. Like what I just imagine you said, like, is kind of a similar, like if you crack a crab claw just right and you like pull the claw out, but then there's a big old chunk of meat. Like,
yeah, it'll
attached
be
to
like,
it.
you know,
It's
when
kind
you,
of the
when you
same deal.
break the claw and you take that top piece out and you pull it and it has that piece of cartilage and the meat comes with it.
Yeah.
That's about what it looks like. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I'm
Like you
imagining
pull away
that,
the hoof
right?
wall and a chunk comes with it.
That's wild.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Wow.
And then you can put them back in work with that chunk still missing after it's grown back a bit.
Yeah, yes. So we stabilize it. We go ahead and bridge it. So ironically enough, if you saw those horses walk out of their recovery stall, granted we don't trot them, but they walk away sound.
Yeah.
They're comfortable. The way we rebuild them and stabilize them, they're comfortable, but all the dermis is still exposed. So you do have to wait till it starts to heal or epithelialize, and then we can actually rebuild it with the modern materials that are available to us in the horse industry now. You're able to rebuild the hoof essentially to stabilize it. And once it gets a nice, about an inch and a half from the cornet down, that's solid growth, we rebuild it and they tend to go right back into work.
Is it intensive trying to keep that thing out of infection and stuff?
Yes. So at first, obviously you have true dermis exposed. And so there are obviously complications associated with it. So you can have infection, you can have reoccurrence of the keratoma, you can have crack formation, excessive granulation tissue formation. So there's a lot of intensive aftercare in that first 8 to 12 weeks for sure. So it's bandaged, it's treated daily. You go through a whole process to keep it clean and as sterile as you can keep a horse's foot, which is never sterile, unfortunately. But
yeah, I was gonna say that's probably pretty tough.
No, it lives in a horrible environment. But
yeah,
I want to ask you about some of the newer technologies coming out for hooves, but first, do we know what causes these keratomas?
Hold on, Ben. We might need a refill before we keep going.
Oh my! What are you guys drinking over there?
So I'm drinking that same Woodford bottle, but Kaylee had stuff for Moscow mules, and that's what she made. Travis was a Moscow mule.
You're still nursing that same bottle?
I don't drink near as much as you do, Ben. No, just kidding. That's my podcast bottle.
He put the nipple away before I got here. It's
Yeah.
not even on there anymore. He hid it in
figured.
the drawer somewhere.
I mean, yeah, when it's hotter than hell like it's been lately, I'm much more of a Coors Light guy than I am drinking Woodford or anything like that.
I know you're young when you can drink Coors Light. They killed Dale Earnhardt, Coors Light car. So I haven't had Coors Light since 2001.
Is that why? Because
Wait,
that's
I thought it
I grew
was-
up in North Carolina.
You're a true
Diehard.
Dale
man.
Earnhardt diehard.
No,
I thought it
don't
was
have
was it not the M&M car?
no.
Oh, okay. I was listening to a podcast.
Joe, you didn't quit
today.
eating M&Ms this whole time, did you?
No,
No,
I
you can
didn't.
go back to M&M. It's just
I
no
didn't.
Coors Light anymore.
Coors Light.
No Colorado Kool-Aid.
Well, that's yeah. I've had a few silver bullets in my day. But anyway, let's take like a 90-second break and we'll both refill and then we'll pick up on keratomas.
All right. And you got your whistles wet.
Yeah. Well, and I was fixing Travis's drink and he was fiddling on his phone. I figured he was texting his wife or something. And the next thing he had was he had the replay of the Dale crash coming up, and he's like, "No, look at this."
I've been blaming Coors Light for 20 years. So.
And but I was right though. Like
the M&M car was there.
Yeah, the M&M car is like involved in the wreck, but they are not the ones who initiate the bumping.
Well, anyway.
Yeah.
So back to the keratomas. What causes those things? Because that's stuff that, you hear talked about and it sounds really scary. And is that something your horse just might get? Or what's going on with that? It
is. So unfortunately, there's many hypotheses out there on the idiopathogenesis, or really what starts a keratoma or causes it to form. And some of those theories are trauma to the dorsal hoof wall, trauma to the coronet. So, hitting a jump, pawing at a stall door, hitting a trailer, anything like that. Recurrent subsolar abscesses, or even just one abscess disturbs enough germinal cells that they start to grow in an abnormal fashion. The thought process that, I don't know how much you guys know about the hoof wall anatomy and the lamellae that attach it, but in the horse, there are both primary and secondary lamellae, both epidermal and dermal, and they kind of interdigitate like a leaf-like structure. Kind of, if you think about like wood being dovetailed into another piece of wood, except then there are two of them, and even those, the secondary lamellae, they can kind of bifurcate, or what we call it, just divide. And so a lot of people think that in that it is a living, viable tissue that's capable of adaptation and change. And some people hypothesize that when they bifurcate or divide, maybe one of them becomes inverted or kind of ingrown and growing back towards the hoof wall rather than going into the dermis itself. So that's one of the hypotheses. There's just lots of them out there, but unfortunately, nobody really knows. And so if you actually truly start studying keratomas, which is obviously one of my areas of research interest, no one has published data on actually a keratoma growing. So nobody has published, most often they're diagnosed with radiographic examination or one specific radiographic view of the distal phalanx. And you will see the keratoma grows within the hoof capsule, and the pressure onto the distal phalanx itself, we believe that it causes a pressure necrosis or absorption of the distal phalanx. And so you'll see a hole in the distal phalanx or the coffin bone. No one's even published a paper with it being 5 millimeters wide, and then 6 months later, it be 10 millimeters wide. No one's even been able to show that they grow histologically. No one has showed that keratomas are growing. So we don't know how they originate. We don't even 100% know that they are growing in size and shape. In reality, anytime you have an abnormality within the distal phalanx, like even the normal little notch in the distal phalanx or the coffin bone, it fills with a weird, indistinct keratinized tissue. So you don't have that same image in the hoof itself. So you can have a coffin bone that's abnormal in shape, but the outer hoof capsule still looks normal. So it fills with this keratinized tissue, which looks histologically or under a microscope exactly the same as a keratoma. So there's a whole lot of thoughts out there, but none have been proven on how they originate, what causes them, and how do they progress. Do they actually change in size and shape?
Holy cow.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a scary thought.
Oh, it's terrifying. And they used to be thought to be very rare, but I bet you right now I have 10 horses in my practice that I see every 6 weeks that have keratomas in their feet. And it's not uncommon for them to be in more than 1 foot. And it's not uncommon to have more than one keratoma in an individual foot.
Do you currently have studies going on about that?
Yes. So actually, the faculty member that just retired, Dr. Pleasant, he and I were studying, trying to compare, essentially delineating or describing or truly describing the orientation and the actual like size and shape of a keratoma, both visually, just with the naked gross eye, radiographically, in an MRI, and histologically or under a microscope, trying to determine. There's a group out of Penn that are advocating for the removal of keratomas using CT or an MRI guided surgical removal of them. But we hypothesize and think, based on our anecdotal or clinical experiences, that we know a radiograph is not sensitive enough to show the true full extent of a keratoma, but we hypothesize that a CT or an MRI guided approach to it would not fully display the full extent of the keratoma. And so we're looking at trying to look with our gross eye upon gross resection. So, radiograph them, put them in an MRI, then truly take them out, dissect them out ourselves, and then look at them histologically at this top. We think they originate, or their parent cell is actually at the coronet. So that project is ongoing, which might be a lot of information for.
No,
this
that's
podcast.
all. That's all great.
answer.
No,
Like I said,
that was an awesome
I
answer.
can get a little nerdy. So
No, dude, we want you to. That
Go
was
for
great.
it on here.
Yeah, that's just a lot to digest. And
Yeah.
like I said, as someone who's a horse owner and works for a lot of horse owners, that's like a terrifying thought.
it is, but I wouldn't be terrified of it. But as a horse owner, I would tell you, look out for a couple of things. So if you have recurrent abscesses in the same foot in the same spot, you should have it looked at. That's the classic presentation of a keratoma. It makes a weak spot in the hoof for microbes, dirt, debris, and bacteria to infiltrate the hoof and get a subsolar abscess. So if you have more than one abscess in the same spot in the same hoof within a 6-month period, you definitely need to have it looked at. Anytime you have a crack that doesn't appear to be as a result of a medial lateral imbalance or a dorsal palmar imbalance, meaning that the foot's just too long and you've got too much lever on it, or it's out of balance medially or laterally, causing the crack, you should absolutely have that radiographed. We now know that a lot of keratomas present as kind of this weak spot within the hoof and kind of predisposes the hoof to cracking. And so when it's easy enough to patch or treat or go after just that symptom that you see, being the crack itself, but it's not uncommon for the underlying cause to be an actual keratoma. But if I were giving advice to a horse owner, I would definitely think about those two situations. And it's easy enough with a radiograph to either confirm or rule out a keratoma.
It's funny you're talking about cracks. When I was a kid, the common knowledge that I learned was you would heat up a piece of steel or a rasp and you'd burn it across the top of a crack.
Mm-hmm.
How much is true about that?
I think very little. So most cracks occur like in the quarter region, at least, they occur from a medial lateral imbalance problem. And so you need to fix that first. So reorient the distal phalanx parallel to the ground and provide the appropriate base of support. And the majority of them will go away without ever patching or really debriding or even burning the top, any of those things, if you just correct the underlying problem. And then most of the toe cracks are cracks on the dorsal surface or the outer top portion of the horse's hoof occur typically secondary to a white line disease problem. So you need to debride to healthy appearing margins and then treat the crack bed itself. And so the idea of just burning a hole or something at the top, kind of like what you would in a piece of wood to keep it from splintering, usually doesn't work. So it's not uncommon I have a picture that I show in a lot of talks about this, where it's been burnt 5 or 6 or 7 times through it, and the crack continues to propagate. Like, so cracks in the horse's hoof wall, especially when they're full thickness, you must treat the underlying cause to truly resolve it. Now, when they're superficial from just the wet, dry cyclical phenomena that we have, particularly on the East Coast or in the Southeast, like the humidity and the dew and stuff on the grass, to then by the afternoon, it's bone dry and they're stomping flies. Those superficial cracks, pretty much anything can resolve those.
So as kind of like the horse I brought you a couple of weeks ago, that ended up being a superficial.
Yeah,
crack.
It wasn't full thickness all the way through, which is good.
But like that burning, that's different from, because you teed the top of that off.
So the burning would be more like the top of that T, like what I did. But the top of that T, I won't lie, for some of that is just superstition. Like, so the guy that taught me how to fix quarter cracks, he always did that.
Right.
But in reality, the reason I keep doing it is it's a marker for you and me.
Right.
So we can see, did the crack actually propagate above it or not? Because you can get lost in the looking at a crack, particularly if you're the person that looks at the crack every day.
Yeah.
You can convince yourself of anything, but it kind of makes a hard fine. This is the line. Did it go any higher?
Yeah.
And that's what you really want to know. If it's growing out, you're golden. Keep doing what you're doing. But if it continues to propagate up, you got to change something.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, if we're done about keratomas for a minute, laminitis, because that's something I've been around a little more. I don't have a lot of experience, but I've seen that in horses. And I've done a little research, and a lot of what you hear about that's prescribed as treatment is pain medication. And I know a lot of horses that have been put down because of laminitis. Is there anything that you are able to do as a treatment after laminitis is set in that leads to remission, or what's up with that?
So I have that same question. But I actually, like, before you get into that, could you just describe in layman's terms what laminitis is? Because I feel like I still don't really have a good grasp on it. And I've been fortunate enough, I haven't really dealt with many horses with that problem. But could you like talk about it? And then, yeah, I had the same question as Ben, as far as what can you go about to fixing it, you know?
Sure. So if you were to think about what is laminitis, and so if you just take the word, it is an itis, which is an inflammation. So, you know, the way the term got coined was it was an inflammation of the lamellae. And so when you truly start to delve into it, it's not always that simple. It's just inflammation. But essentially what happens is the bony column, you know, the bones of the whole limb, and really the bone, the coffin bone, or the distal phalanx that lives within inside the hoof capsule, is attached to the hoof with these leaf-like projections, both some coming from the hoof capsule, which we call epidermal, some coming from the dermis that covers the distal phalanx, which we call dermal lamellae. And so you have primary dermal and epidermal lamellae, and they just interdigitate. And then off of each one of those, you know, so there are 600 to 800 primary dermal lamellae and 600 to 800 primary epidermal lamellae in every hoof. And then the horse, or really all equines, so horse, donkey, zebra, all of those mules are the ones that have secondary lamellae. So, you know, goats, pigs, cows, all of those, they don't have them. But off of each of those 600 to 800 primary lamellae are 150 to 200 secondary lamellae. And they're really the bond between the hoof capsule and the bony column or the distal phalanx. And laminitis is really just a multifactorial disease process in which that bond becomes compromised. And so you can have it become compromised or have problems within it, meaning a pain response or an inflammation in which you don't have full separation of the lamellae. So you can just have a laminitis that the horse gets painful and the bony column stays within its normal position within the hoof capsule. But in most laminitis cases that horse owners are going to talk about, certainly the ones that go to vets and really vet farrier teams, are when that attachment becomes compromised to the point that it can no longer suspend the weight of the horse's body within that hoof capsule, and the bond between the hoof capsule and the distal phalanx becomes compromised to a point where you actually have a separation, and the bony column becomes unstable within the hoof capsule and ultimately moves. So either it will rotate or sink within the hoof capsule.
Okay, so let me say this back to you in an effort to understand this better.
Sure.
All right, so imagine I had like a bucket, that goes in like a horse's stall, and then you were to run like a piece of plastic or like a net over the bucket, and then you take like a fence post and drop it into the bucket, and then the fence post is hanging there in the bucket, basically. basically that net that's holding up the fence post has
Yep.
gotten compromised.
Yep.
And that's
and can't hold up the fence
and
post
can't
anymore.
hold up the
Yep.
fence post, and that causes pain for the horse.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's one way to think about it. And then another way that often resonates with horse owners is if you just think of Velcro.
Okay.
So a Velcro strap, I mean, we all have those, right? On our fly sheets, the blankets, the bell boots, all of those things. So we don't know how many of those little Velcro attachments it actually takes to hold it on there.
Right.
But once X number of those become compromised, it just can't hold anymore.
Okay.
And so they just kind of let go.
And what causes the compromising?
Okay, so the compromising, we used to try to put it in just one box and that all laminitis cases are the same. But in reality, what we've learned there are really, at least what is commonly accepted now, there are 3 different pathways that occurs. And so you can have an inflammatory process that results in what we think are these little trigger factors that get released into the hoof. And we know that there is an upregulation of something called matrix metallic proteinases that are they're the little enzymes that allow or control the attachment and the reattachment of those lamellae. So if you think about a hoof capsule, it grows beyond a stationary distal phalanx, just like your hoof nail, or not your hoof nail, but your toenail or your fingernail does, or your hair. It's constantly growing, but it grows beyond your finger, right? Like it's not like the bone within your finger moves. Same thing happens with a hoof. It's growing down all the time, but the bone doesn't move. So there's something that's constantly attaching and reattaching these lamellae to allow that to happen. And those are called MMPs, or matrix metallic proteases. And we know that there's an upregulation of MMP2 and 9 during laminitis. And we think that it just becomes so uncontrolled that not enough of them are attached to any longer hold up the weight of the horse. And so that's the process that occurs when you have like the retained placentas, the Potomac horse fevers, the enteritises, the colitis, all of those inflammatory processes. So that's one big group. Another big group, which is the one we really target to try to prevent, because you can't really prevent an enteritis or a retained placenta. Like those things happen.
So a horse could get like Potomac horse fever and then become laminitic.
Oh yeah,
from a bad case of that.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I
Yep.
did not realize that.
Oh yeah, no,
Okay.
and those tend to be some of the worst laminitis cases. And those Potomac horse fever horses that become laminitic often slough their entire hoof capsule. They tend to be some of the worst of the worst. So vaccinate your horses, particularly if you live in this region. But another big group, and this is the one I think we can really prevent, is the obese horse, or the horse that has essentially insulin dysregulation or insulin resistant. So we know that just insulin itself is toxic to the lamellae. So they cause essentially the little epidermal basal cells, or the tiny little cells that are actually the finite bond between the hoof capsule and the distal phalanx, to just increase in numbers and proliferation. So they kind of become elongated and weakened. And then as well as you will have, those horses are often obese. So you just have more weight on them, and they essentially it's very insidious. So they just slowly get worse, slowly get worse, slowly get worse. And then all of a sudden the distal phalanx becomes unstable within the hoof capsule. And so that group can really just be prevented just by keeping horses in an appropriate body condition score. And that's all the horses that are obese, insulin resistant, any of the endocrinopathies like PPID or equine Cushing's disease. All of those could, in theory, be prevented. So that's another different pathway for laminitis. And then the last one is probably the one a lot of people are more familiar with, something called ischemia. And so essentially are unilateral weight bearing. So we know the horse, if you sit and watch a horse, they constantly move and load a foot and unload a foot, load a foot and unload a foot. And essentially when a foot is fully loaded, there's a hydraulic kind of tourniquet effect where there's no blood flow in or out. So the horses that break one leg and then they're overloading the other leg, or kind of compensating on it, they will often get laminitis on that foot truly from ischemia. So meaning if there's a lack of blood flow, oxygen and glucose to those cells. So then again, no blood, no oxygen, you have cellular death, the attachment goes away. So a lot of people think of like Barbaro. So he had the broken leg, bore too much weight or was too compensatory on the opposite limb. got an ischemia, got what we call contralateral limb laminitis, and ultimately had to be humanely destroyed or euthanized as a result of it. But now we know that there are at least those 3 distinct pathways for laminitis, where historically we tried to make it a one thing, and that tended to revolve around ischemia or lack of blood and oxygen.
Wow. Okay. So now we do need to circle back around to Ben's question.
Sure.
It's like I said, I've been fortunate. I haven't really had to deal with laminitis, but yeah. And Ben, you can talk to it more, but as far as once it has happened, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
So-
or even in the early stages, is there an early sign where you see something that can be caught? And when the metallic, what did you call that? The
Matrix metalloproteinases.
matrix metalloproteinase.
Yeah. Or
When-
MMPs.
So does that get like attacked by something, or?
We think so. That's why I said this word trigger factor, right? Like nobody, that's a very nebulous term. Nobody knows what that is. We don't know what it is that in that inflammatory process that happens and goes to the feet that causes that. But what we do know is that if you institute cryotherapy or icing and cooling of the digit, you can prevent laminitis. So, lots of studies, or I shouldn't say lots, but several studies have been done in which they essentially cool one limb from either the carpus down, where the original papers, but now they've studied all the way down to just cooling up to the pastern level. And we know that if you can keep hoof wall surface temperatures around 10 degrees Celsius using some combination of ice and water, you can prevent laminitis. So a lot of studies were done where they would literally induce laminitis in the horse, and they would have a left front limb without cryotherapy or outside the ice and water, and the right front in ice and water. And the horse, or the right front limb, would not get laminitis, and the other limb would. So any horses that are suspected or predisposed to laminitis, like those horses, if it goes to the hospital and it has an enteritis, or it has a colitis, or it has a retained placenta, or it has Potomac horse fever, those horses, I know for horse owners, it sucks to have to pay for it because it's intensive to keep ice and water on a limb continuously cooled 24 hours a day for at least 3 days, but it has been shown to prevent laminitis. But obviously it takes a lot of manpower and stuff to be able to do that.
How do you even go about doing that on a horse?
There's lots of things. So it's been shown if you just take a simple 5-liter fluid bag, for like an IV bag, put it on the horse's foot, fill it with ice water slurry, tape it on there, and then replace it every 2 hours, you can prevent laminitis. There are lots of commercially available cooling sleeves for the distal limb. Waders. If you go back through the historical literature, horses were taken down to the cold river and stood in the river. But you can stand them in muck tubs, just big tubs full of ice and water, lots of things you could do, but it is obviously labor intensive to do it. And to actually get the benefits from it, it's been shown it needs to be continuously cooled for at least 72 hours after the initial insult. So after the initial problem. And so that is really the only preventative thing out there. And so from that, beyond keeping horses at an appropriate body condition score. So if you eliminate the pasture associated laminitis, or the obese horse, which accounts for approximately 50% of all laminitis cases, those are the only 2 prevention things that we know of. And from there, it just comes down to treatment. And like you said, a lot of the treatment protocols out there are aimed at just controlling the inflammation and the pain, because it's often an uncontrollable pain for these horses to get them comfortable. And unfortunately, it's one of those times where it sucks to be a farrier, because there is no trim, no shoe, nothing that you're going to put on there that is going to make that horse comfortable. So we try very hard to reduce stress and strain on the lamellae by making it easy for them to move in all directions. And then also recruiting the frog and sole into load bearing. So something as simple as taping on styrofoam pads, or putting in impression material or silicone materials, or applying heart bars, any number of things out there that work and are aimed at reducing stress and strain on them. But if you can't control the pain medically and stop what is causing the laminitis, it's just an uphill battle. You're just peeing in the wind if you will. So unfortunately, like it's really is the inflammation and controlling the pain is step one.
Is there a measured success rate of cooling the hoof and trying to catch it in an early stage? Has that been measured, or is that just something that works sometimes and it's recommended?
No, it has been shown to work all the time if it is put on or instituted, started 100% of the time. It is preventative if it is instituted before the laminitic insult. But that's really hard to do, right? Like it's the horse is presented after it's already caught, or the horse is presented after it already has the retained placenta for 48 hours. Like, so actually getting it on there or starting it before the laminitic insult is really not clinically possible. The way it was done in a research project was you put it on and then they actually literally gave a carbohydrate overload to the horses or gave it a bolus of oligofructose to institute laminitis. And so it's easy, right? Like in that point. But clinically, it has been shown if you can institute cryotherapy early on in either the developmental or the acute phase. So right when you start, either right before or right when you start to see clinical signs of lameness, it does dramatically decrease the number of horses that do sink or rotate. And even the horses that can still get laminitis and do sink or rotate, the degree of destruction to the lamellae has been shown to be markedly reduced. So even if the horse has already got laminitis and already lame, cryotherapy has still been proven to be beneficial to the lamellae.
Could you, in layman's terms, give a scenario where a horse is suspect of that and caught, and like a regular guy with a horse and gets to that point and then they catch it and they treat, like you said, and they catch it before that happens?
Yeah. So lots of scenarios. So let's say you've got the horse that breaks into the feed room and eats a whole bunch of grain. Absolutely. Yes. You probably sit and watch it, but even if the vet comes out, tubes it, and does all the things that they're going to do, if you go ahead and institute cryotherapy in that horse, you will reduce the risk of laminitis. If you have the mare that has a foal and it's not passing its placenta as soon as you would like, absolutely going ahead and recruiting or instituting cryotherapy would be a good one. If you have a horse that does really have any inflammatory response, so if it has a high fever for any reason, whether it's Potomac horse fever or any number of things, absolutely cryotherapy would be a good thing for it. You know, anything that you think might be at risk for laminitis would be a great thing to institute cryotherapy or cooling of the hoof and the digit. Just the problem occurs in how do you do it? Like it is hard to put fresh ice on a hoof every 2 hours. It's very labor intensive, and only certain places and certain horses are going to be able to put up with it. I'll admit, even if at my house, we don't have a barn, we don't even have a small paddock. So if that happens to one of our horses, it is what it is, unless we go to the hospital. So it is tough for a horse owner to just institute it on their own, but it's never a bad idea.
So if you have, like you said, like you get like the pony that gets in the feed room or whatever, do you go ahead and, like, say you could do the cryotherapy, do you go ahead and do it for all 4 feet or?
Yes.
Okay. So you got to do cryo, because I mean, all 4 legs is way harder than just doing one.
Oh, it's a lot. I mean, and you would like to definitely do all 4 if you could, but we do know laminitis does affect the forelimbs or the front feet more than the hinds. And that's mostly just from a weight phenomena. If you just think about the center of mass of where the horse is located, more weight is borne on the forelimbs while the horse is standing. So if you have to choose, do the forelimbs or the front limbs, but ideally all 4.
And so does it need to be, again, we're kind of talking almost theoretical because it's so hard to do this, but like, say you got like a walk-in freezer,
Mhm.
like walking your horse into the freezer, or does it need to be like applied on the like tissue?
I don't know that anybody's studied that. Like if you just go stand them in a freezer,
yeah.
which I mean,
Like for
you
example,
could do.
yeah,
There
you
are
know,
freezers big enough.
yeah, like you
Yeah.
live in Montana,
Mhm.
and your pony gets in the feed room in February.
Oh yeah, just go
And-
stand it in the snow. You
Yeah,
be just
and
fine.
yeah, and exactly. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna have the pony out in the snowbank, and
Yeah.
it's already
Yeah.
like 10 degrees outside or whatever.
Yeah.
10
No,
degrees
you'd
Fahrenheit.
be golden there, I think.
Yeah.
But the current recommendations from the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine are to maintain hoof wall surface temperatures at 10 degrees Celsius,
Okay.
which is just obviously above freezing.
Right.
But and then in the research models, the only
Right.
way that has been able to occur is with ice and water
Okay.
touching the
So-
dorsal hoof wall.
So you're just doing it to the hoof. You don't have to do it like the whole leg.
They've been shown to cool it up to the pastern.
Pass.
Like the initial studies that were done by Van Epps and Pollitt, they were cooling all the way up to the carpus.
Gotcha. Because like for example, Kaylee, that
Mhm.
mare, she jumps. She'll after the mare's been at a show and doing like the meter jumpers or whatever, she'll ice her, cannon bones and stuff
Mhm.
with those ice packs. But
Mhm.
so yeah, I don't know. Like I don't know if they make ice packs for like the hoof wall, but
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
And there's lots of both commercially available things, but unfortunately, really the only ones that have been shown to work are like that IV fluid bag. The waders are what we call essentially just a big rubber boot, like a Davis boot, a soft ride boot, or like the Game Ready system. Any of those that are essentially just a wader that you put ice and water in. And then the muck tub full of ice and water. Those are the ones that have been shown to work. There are commercially available cooling things that go around the distal limb. Really, there's an ice sleeve that's just designed to go around just the cornet, but it hasn't been shown to work, unfortunately.
But yeah, then you got to get something that's broken enough to stand in a muck tub for 3 days.
Exactly. No, it's one of those easy
Good
things
luck.
to say,
Start working
institute
on it.
cryotherapy, but it's a harder thing to actually implement.
Go ahead and add that to your first 30 days, Ben.
Hell, that
should
just
be.
sounds like it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
But
unless
I
you're
would
one of
tell
these
you-
guys on the cutting edge of fitness and you've got yourself an ice tub, and you're doing that every day. You just
Yeah.
get the horse where he comes with you. So
Yeah.
that'd make your training hour pretty easy. Just take him with you to the ice tub.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
but how good would that be? You've had a horse for 90 days, and then you're like, well, if you ever think he's getting laminitic, he's broke to stand
Oh,
in the muck tub, so you're
That
good.
should be extra money.
Yeah.
But if I were to talk to horse trainers and ask for one thing beyond just stand for the farrier, I mean, let's be honest, that's number one in my mind.
Mhm.
If they could do that, but if we could teach horses to lay down, like so anecdotally or clinically, the horses that get laminitis and spend more time laying down do better than the horses that stand.
So
So if we could teach horses to lay down on command and stay down and eat down and drink down, like we already do things clinically, like put their food up in a net so they don't have to put their head over, or if they're down, we try to feed them on the ground or put water on the ground or work on them while they're on the ground. But
So how long down are we talking about? How long on the ground? Like
Oh,
for days on end, staying there?
Well, yeah. Well, yes and no. Like, I mean, no horse is just going to lay down for 72, 96 hours, anything like that. But if you could teach them to lay down and stay down and be down for at least while the horse is painful, they would do better. So we already do things like, isolate them, get them away from the rest of the horses. Don't keep the laminitic horse right near the feed room where horses or people are going in and out. Don't keep them near the entrance to the barn. Like we try to isolate them, put them in dark areas, try to get them laid down. Some researchers have even taken and tried to lower the roof of stalls to encourage a horse to lay down to prevent or limit the laminitis. Because it's a horrible disease process. So anything you can do, but if the horses that definitely lay down, they do do better. And then even from a farrier standpoint, if you're trying to trim them or change their shoes or anything, like it's uncomfortable for me as the person while they're working if they're laying down, but it's better for them than me picking up one foot and having them put a whole bunch of weight on the other foot. Like, so teaching horses to lay down would be a great, I know that sounds crazy, but it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe and I know a few guys, a couple that they kind of specialize in that. But
Yeah.
see about that. Joe knows what I mean.
Yeah.
We won't open up that can of worms on the podcast, but
That's
Just
yeah.
charge extra.
that makes sense though, what you're saying, if there was a way to train them.
Well, and
Because
I mean,
in our world, so I should just go ahead and state it because I'm alluding to it. In our world, there's a thing about, so did you ever watch The Horse Whisperer that came out in 1995 or whenever with Robert Redford? And they lay the horse down.
Yeah.
And after that movie, like we do with a lot of movies in our society, you watch a movie and now you're an expert. You don't even watch a documentary. You don't even take a class. You watch a movie from Hollywood and you're an expert. And that movie had some accolades. I mean, Buck Brannaman, he was there. He helped out on the movie. But anyway, laying down a horse kind of got to be a show move. And so there's definitely some applications. I know I've heard Buck in the clinics talk about laying down horses. And he's very careful about how he talks about it, because in the horse training world, if you talk to most horse trainers, laying down a horse is more of a move on a horse that's troubled. And it's viewed as something that's going to calm the horse. And not my words, Buck's. And he says very rarely is most horse trainers going to pull that off successfully. So I get where you're coming from. I was kind of being funny about laying horses down, but
now
if you were to really train it and do it properly, I'm sure there's a way. That's something that'd be amazing to talk to Buck about sometime. But I know the way most horse trainers hear it and view it is like, oh yeah, I've seen the YouTube video on that. I know how to get my rope over the neck and onto the foot and get the leverage, and I'll get your horse laying down in no time. And those horses, Joe maybe has had a few too, where folks have tried to lay them down, and it's a bugger. They're worried about that.
Yeah, they're very, very bothered. But there's a big difference between laying a horse down and teaching a horse to lay down. Because like for me personally, like before, so Ben and I, we, if we had to pick anyone, we'd like go to a lot of Buck Brannaman clinics, and he's kind of the guy that has worked best for us. And that's, who we're kind of choosing to learn from. So he's been a big influence on us. But before I kind of got involved in that, and honestly, I don't think it was anything bad. Like one of the mules we have down here, like when I was in, I don't know, like 18 years old, like I taught it to lay down because it was like an 18-hand mule that we wanted to ride. But I didn't like put one, it wasn't like troubled, and two, it wasn't like I didn't put ropes on it. I didn't do anything like, I like taught him to lay down. I think the thing that gets one really dangerous and two really troubles horses is when you go to lay a horse down, because it's a horse that does not want to lay down. That being said, I mean, if you're someone in the line of work like me and Ben, horses laying down, there's not a whole lot, until you just said that, there's not a whole lot of reason to like even go about that or
again, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but
and that could be a great project, but go about it carefully. Find somebody that can help you. I'm sure if Buck had the time to spend with you, he could show you how to lay one down properly. Or I bet Bill, if he was home, whatever. There's a lot of mentors that we have that could help us. But if you're going to go on YouTube, I can think of a few videos I've seen myself that come up early, and that wouldn't be the way to. That wouldn't be the way to do it.
No,
I'm sure there's a way where you could do it. I mean, obviously they've been doing it for thousands of years. You see videos of camels being laid down, reindeer. They do it with reindeer. Countless animals people lay down to mount them, but they don't do it like the YouTube horse trainers of today.
It's not like you said, it's not the Horse Whisperer or like John Wayne with the pole in the middle of the round pen, like dallying off and like choking the horse out. And he's like, well, now you can ride him.
Did he lay that horse down in
Well.
Hondo?
Yeah, there's one Hondo, and then doesn't he's doing some crap in I don't think he laid it down in Hondo, but he's doing kind of the same deal like in the Cowboys or something like that, I think, where they got that pole in the middle of the round pen. And he's just, he's being real John Wayne about it or whatever.
Like a mule pole?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking. I mean, I've never seen one in person, but like there's those guys that like they're like starting their colts in the round pen, but like instead of having a saddle horse or whatever, they have a pole in the middle of the round pen. And so that's like how they're teaching the horse to give, is like the horse is going around and then they dally off around this pole and watch the sparks fly. And
I've seen one of those in person. They have one of those in All the Pretty Horses.
Oh yeah.
If you've watched that, but I've seen one in person, and they call it a mule pole. And it kind of makes sense, because if you don't have a saddle horse and you're trying to halter break a mule, now, not if you're the first guy working with the mule, you should be able to do it correctly. But if you don't have a saddle horse,
if the
and you're
mule's
trying
like
to halter
5,
break a mule that's ran away from people for like 10 years, you kind of want a mule pole.
I could and that mule pole is probably like 12 foot in the ground.
Yeah, it's kind of like your big brother. You do what you can, and then you dally him to the mule pole.
Yeah.
And that'll get him shut down.
Yeah, that'll get him swinging out way back there.
Untracking those hindquarters.
Untracking those hindquarters, like I said, stop, you son of a gun.
Yeah. But back to laying them down.
Yeah,
that makes
is
sense. And that
interesting,
seems, have they had any success with that, with lowering the roof?
I'll admit I can't remember the whole results of that paper, but no, when you lower the roof, they don't stand up.
Yeah,
but I don't think that was in an effort to prevent laminitis. I think it was just a behavioral thing. I briefly remember reading it, but no, if you lower the roof, I mean, they're not gonna stand up. They stay in a.
Do you think there's any? And again, I'm just spitballing because I'm no expert or anything like that. In my experience, like just traveling with horses and stuff, like if you get like a good broke horse and they're just kind of like confident in themselves and really comfortable around people and stuff, if you do have them in a stall or whatever, they're way more likely to lay down than like maybe you're traveling with like a 4-year-old colt that hasn't seen a lot of the world or whatever.
Sure.
So obviously that's different than like teaching them to lay down, but having good broke horses that are comfortable enough to, like, if their feet are bothering them, they're in a place where they're like, I think I can lay down, and no one's going to try to eat me. That's probably only in their best interest in terms of healing up.
Certainly in their best interest. And like you said, the more calm they are, the more used they are to being around people, the better they're going to do that. And then we do some things like heavily bed the stalls with straw. They tend to lay down more. And then, like I said, just making sure they're in an isolated, well, not isolated, meaning that they're totally by themselves. Like horses freak out when they don't have a buddy, but not putting them by the cross ties, not putting them by the feed room,
like a low traffic area.
Yeah, like somewhere that's kind of quiet. Not as dumb as it sounds. Just not turning on the light, leaving it dark, not opening the door right there, those kind of things. And then I'll admit, from a farrier standpoint, like we often, those horses, we'll try to work on them at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night rather than at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when a whole lot of things are going on in the barn. Like try to just sneak in there, me, the owner, the vet, and do whatever we're going to do and try to keep them down.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Travis, I wanted to ask you about, you spent some time in Europe, didn't you?
No, I've traveled to Europe a bit, but no, I never really spent.
Was that for school or just for fun?
Is that a European thing you got on your shirt there? That looks like a European word.
Oh yeah. So on my shirt's a word, Kirkhard. It's probably what I think is the best horseshoe on the market is made out of the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Do you get many interns from Europe?
No, I've never had one. Unfortunately, the visa situation and getting them here and able to work is often proved problematic. But I did like, so my graduate degree is from a university in England, but I did all that online. And then I did go over to England to take some farrier exams, because they're the oldest, probably most respected farrier organization in the world. And they're a country that you have to be licensed and regulated. And there's a very strict training program, apprenticeship program for farriers there, as opposed to the US, where there's nothing.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because talking to our farrier here, he's talked about the differences between our regulation in the United States and Europe. And do you see a benefit to that? Is that something where we kind of lack here, or do you think that hampers the farriers there?
I think it does both. So I think the strict training program over there. So over there and when I say over there, I mean in England, the UK, you have to serve a 4-year, and I think I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 months, but a 4-year and 3 or 4 month apprenticeship, and that's specific time with an approved training farrier, and specific time in one of the colleges, actually doing both book work and hands-on true learning. I think their minimum standard for what a farrier can do is higher than the US, just on average. But selfishly, coming from a capitalistic environment, that does keep the price down. So the higher end or more elite farriers in the US make a lot more money than the high end or elite farriers in the UK, because the minimum standard is so high over there. Here in the US, there's no regulation of nothing. And so, I mean, you have farriers that are totally self-taught, just went to Tractor Supply, bought some stuff and went at it, to people who have studied for multiple years under people who, true science-based people. You have, the gamut is just so wide here in the US, and it's shown in a pricing structure as well. I mean, you have people shooing horses anywhere from, $45 a horse to $1,000 a horse. And so our higher end or elite market probably makes more money per horse than their higher end or elite. But I do think the minimum standard is probably higher over there. But unfortunately, the fair profession is, since it's not outside regulated, and unfortunately horse owners aren't as educated on it as I think they should be, there's really no kind of checks and balance system on it. Like you're
talking about here.
Yeah, here in the US, and even there, like a farrier goes out and does the job, and ultimately the quality of that job is often dictated just by that farrier. How hard they want to work. Are they going to hold themselves to a higher standard? Do they have an intrinsic motivation to do a really good job? Because unfortunately, I mean, and I hate to say it, but you can do a pretty poor job and most horses will still be sound.
Yeah.
I mean, horses are pretty resilient for something that can also just die at the blink of an eye. Like they're this weird anomaly. And unfortunately, I think of farriers, if they don't have an intrinsic motivation to do a better job on the next horse that they do, or do the best job they possibly can on the horse that's right in front of them, then unfortunately, there's really nothing. What are you going to do about it? Which is unfortunate.
So like, what are they doing in the rest of Europe? Do they have any regulation in any of the other countries over there that you know of?
They do. So Germany is regulated. You have to be licensed there. There is a European Federation of farriers, and I think the majority of them are more like us. They're just voluntary certification programs. Certainly in England, the Worshipful Company of Farriers has been around. I can't remember if it's the 1700s or 1800s, but they're a long-standing organization, and they provide the certification, or they're licensing the training program, and then the checks and balances of the Farrier Registration Council.
So with that, because I mean, I feel like that kind of reflects a lot of just like any business. If you compare like Europe to the United States, because we're kind of tend to be more capitalistic. Like you said, that the top end is higher, but maybe the mean over there is a little higher.
Sure.
In terms of like quality and stuff. Say there's someone listening to this who, you know, is kind of like you back in 2001. They're like 18 and thinking about pursuing this. What would be the best steps for them to take? Because like you said, there's no kind of formal system over here. So that's, and you know, they're probably not going to start pulling shoes when they're 10 like you did.
Sure. No, I think my ideal like training program, if somebody were to want to be a farrier, the first thing I would encourage them to do would be to find a professional, respectable farrier in their area and go and ride and spend some time with. So just go. See, get in the truck, go see what life's like. Like, because unfortunately, a lot of people get into the farrier industry because one of the common things you'll hear is because I don't like people, I just like horses. Well, every horse comes with a person, and every horse often comes with an owner, a trainer, a rider, a groom, a vet, a massage therapist, chiropractor. Like there's still people. So you need to get out and make sure you can handle that and see that there's life outside of just trimming and shoeing the horse. So the callbacks, the text messages, the billing, the invoicing, the just keeping track of all that, dealing with the supply shop, like all of those things. So try to get out there and see what it's truly like, how much it sucks when it's 100 degrees, or what it feels like when it's snowing and you got to go shoe those 6 horses, or you got to go out and trim those 10 brood mares. Go actually see what it's like beyond just, okay, I'm here, I have this horse, this is my barn, I watch my farrier and that looks pretty cool. Like, because every barn, every farm you go to is a little different. So get out and see it. And then if you can survive that, then I would tell you to go to the longest farrier school that you can afford, both financially and time-wise. Like I get it in the farrier profession, most farriers are not like that's their one and only career like me. A lot of them, it's their second or third career, and they can't be away from family, or they can't be away from their job, or they can't be away from whatever for multiple years on end. But if you can go for 6 months, great. If you can go for a year, great. If you can only go 2 weeks, then 2 weeks is all you get. Like, it is what it is. But go to the longest one you can afford, both financially and time wise. And then I am a strong believer in the apprenticeship system. So I think you should, once you're done with a farrier school, or you leave a farrier school, you should go work with another farrier. And I think you will get one-on-one, hands-on instruction. You will, in all aspects of the job, from the horse to the people, to the billing, to the inventory, to everything. And if you can stay with that person while you're building a business, you will end up with a higher level of clientele. Because if you're working for a farrier that is competent, professional, they're going to already have too many horses to shoe. And so they're going to pass off their overload to you, or the new clients, or whatever they call them. They're going to pass it off. So you're going to get a better group of clients than if you just go put your card at Tractor Supply and then see what happens. You're going to get those rough horses. You're going to get the people that don't want to pay. You're going to get the poor conditions. You're going to get yourself hurt. And so if you can go in the apprenticeship system for a year, 2, 3, or 4 years, you will be far better in the end. Because unfortunately, the number of farriers that graduate farrier school, less than 5% of them are still farriers at the 5-year mark. And I think a lot of that comes down to they're not prepared when they get out, and they're doing horses that are just too rough. It's already a hard enough job. So if anything you can do to make it easier, the better. And I think establishing a mentorship group and people you can learn from is very, very important.
Well, gentlemen, we're getting towards the end of this thing, but you heard him, everybody. Go and find yourself a mentor. I know that's something Joe and I couldn't agree with more.
Yeah.
And we're going to have you back on sometime, Travis. This has been very informative talking with you. And
yeah, I got about 10 some of those more questions.
Yeah, there's so many big questions around horses' feet, and it makes sense. I mean, horses are big, and when you ever sit around and look at a horse and you realize that whole animal is standing on those little feet, there must be a lot going on in there. And
from an
you don't want
engineering
to screw that
standpoint,
up.
it's not how you would design one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean it was funny, like you say that, like going to school and getting an engineering degree. Like you'd come home and not even the feet, just like every aspect of a horse.
The
And you just
GI
look,
system,
yeah,
everything.
you'd look at the horse and then you'd see like the cow sitting right next to him across the fence. And you're like, that's like a thing of beauty. Like cow, like it's impossible to hurt cows,
Yeah.
like compared to horses. You know, I know that cattle and, you know, steers and heifers, especially like the young ones, they find all manners of way to get fouled up. But just compared to horses, it's like, wow, they're so much more resilient. They're like
tough.
they're an engineering marvel. And then horses are just these things that are like made of glass half the time.
Designed to fail.
Yeah. At least they're not sheep or anything like that.
Yeah, that'd be terrible if they were sheep. But it's
Yeah.
great we get to work with them every day.
Yeah.
And it was
So-
funny what you said a minute ago about people as a misconception think, oh, I'll be a farrier. I won't have to deal with people. And same thing with
Yeah.
horsemanship. But
People
what we
think
say a lot
that-
of times is you cannot become a good horseman if you don't become good with people. You have to do both. You can't count out your fellow man. He's important too. And at the end of the day, everybody owns a horse. If you're getting paid to ride a horse, somebody owns him. So not only do you have to deal with that person, but you have to have an impact on them in some way. You have to leave them with something that, whether it's going to be a return customer or that horse goes home to a good life, or you make a new friend, whatever it is, you don't just ride the horse and not pay attention to the person. And that's a very important part, and not something anybody interested in the horsemanship world should discount. You know, that could be a starting point. Go become good with people. As you get good with horses.
I think in the horse world, if we could all just embrace a team first philosophy and realize that we're all here just for the betterment of that one horse.
Yeah.
And stop fighting ourselves as professionals, whether it is the rider, the trainer, the groom, the farrier, the vet, whoever. We're all there just trying to help that one horse. So we should all just be one team and remember that.
Yeah. That's like, so, well, the guy who trims our horses, you know him. I asked him when I started doing this, I was like, hey, so I'm going to get a lot more horses in here. If the clients want it, would you be interested in, you know, working with those horses? And he's like, I mean, I guess, because he's kind of at a point, he really doesn't need more clientele if he doesn't want it. And I told him, I was like, well, I know that it's my job to get them ready for you to trim or to shoe or, you know, whatever you need to do. And at if any point you're working on one and you can look at me and say, hey, that, like, he's not at a place where I'm going to like deal with this, or I'm not going to do a good job if I try to manhandle this thing. You can tell me and you can be 100% honest with me, and that'll be fine. And we'll just get him 6 weeks from now or whenever you come back. Cause I'm going to put that on me. But at the same time, you know, I know you're going to do a good job. And so it's going to be my job to make sure they're broke and you can handle their feet. It's going to be your job to keep them sound, because I'm going to try to ride them as much as I can, you know?
Sure.
And yeah, just having that, like, if there could just be more of those kind of straight up conversations in the horse industry, because I feel like there's not a lot of them. I don't know what your feeling
I agree
is,
100%.
but that's my 2 cents from what I've seen. There's just not a lot of like straight up, like, well, this is what I'll do and this is what you do. And we know if something happens, we'll not even like a blame thing, but just like we know who is responsible for
what,
making sure what needs to get done. Yeah.
Sure.
And just being straight up. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Is if more people in the horse industry, whether you're a vet or a trainer or a farrier or whatever, if everyone could just kind of communicate and be honest, that would be way more advantageous than some of the ticky-tacky stuff that happens.
It would. And ultimately, when we can or we don't, it's the horse that suffers. It's not the people.
Yeah. They always,
and the horse never had anything to do with it. They're just there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And Travis, it's been great talking with you.
Great.
Really
Well,
enjoyed it. And
thank you guys for having me.
Yeah,
Oh,
man,
you're
this has
more
been
than
a lot of
welcome.
fun. Well, we're definitely going to have to get you back on because I feel like we could go for like another 2-3 hours just having these conversations.
No, sure.
This has been great.
easily.
Yeah.
All righty. Well,
Cool, man.
we'll talk again next time.
All right. Sounds good. See ya.
Absolutely. See you, bud.
All right. Bye, everybody.